200.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Yes!
This is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
He's a great guy.
Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm waving at the camera. I'm on YouTube, apparently, according to DJ Shannon. So if you want to go over to youtube.com or on your phone, on your YouTube app, type in my name, Ross Kaminsky, with a Y on the end. And you can check me out on video this morning and see my home studio and all that. I'm standing at the Everything for Offices standing desk that I tell you about all the time. A lot of stuff to do today, including in a moment here. I want to share some remarkable, sad, touching audio with you from Rush Limbaugh's show yesterday. Before we do, one quick note that I've been meaning to mention on the show for several days now, and just, I don't know, slipped my brain, such as it is. And this relates specifically to voting in Colorado. A bunch of listeners have said, hey, Ross, there was no secrecy sleeve in my ballot envelope. And for those of you who have voted in Colorado for some years, typically when the ballot shows up in the mail, what you get in the ballot is an instruction sheet, a secrecy sleeve, which is kind of like an envelope, except only two sides are sealed and two sides are open. And then your ballot, you fill out the ballot, you put it in the secrecy sleeve, and then you put that in the envelope that you mail back or drop in at your county's drop box. Please make sure to drop it off in your county. And a bunch of listeners have said there's no secrecy sleeve or privacy sleeve for the ballot. So when I put the ballot in the envelope and there's some holes in the envelope, you can look, and depending on how you put the ballot in, you could tell something about the votes in the envelope, and people fear that that would cause an unscrupulous poll worker to look at it and throw away ballots that they think are voting the wrong way from that poll worker's perspective. So here's the answer on that. The instruction sheet itself, which is pretty large and comes folded up, is designed to also function as that secrecy sleeve, okay? So you can open up that instruction sheet, gather all the instructions that you need when it comes to how to fill out your ballot. And when you're done, fold that instruction sleeve back up, that instruction sheet, it's big. Fold it back up just the way it was, and then sandwich your ballot in it or slide your ballot into it and put that in the envelope, and there you go. And it does say somewhere on that instruction sheet that this sheet is, can be used as a privacy sleeve, but it's printed down at the bottom in a place where I imagine most people would miss it, and I almost missed it. Because I had the same thing. Where's that secrecy sleeve, privacy sleeve? And then I saw that on the instructions, but it wasn't well marketed. It wasn't well advertised. None of the election officials bothered telling us that on the show. So I just figured I'd make sure you all knew about it. So there you go. I should also mention real quick, I saw this statistic. Let me find it right now. I think it's actually up at the Denver Post website right now, if I can find it, and I want to make sure that I get the numbers right. But there's some huge numbers from early voting in Colorado. Gosh, I'm looking. Here we go. Okay, this is from the Denver Post from yesterday afternoon. More than 200,000 more Coloradans submitted their ballots Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, bringing the total to 641,000 and change as of the end of the weekend, according to data from the Colorado Secretary of State's office. And so with 16 days before the election, and I'm talking about Sunday, right? Sunday was 16 days before the election. We had, again, 641,000 ballots turned in. By comparison, in 2016, that number was 114,000. So more than 5 times higher, probably closer to 6 times higher than the same number of than the number of ballots turned in the same number of days before the election 4 years ago. Now, what does it mean? Well, they don't count the ballots, but what they do is they count they run the ballots apparently through a machine, but they don't tabulate or give anyone a result of who's voted for what. But what they do count is the political party of each of the ballots that has been turned in. The other thing that running them through the machine does, because we have this ballot tracks thing here in Colorado, which is kind of cool, and I suggest you check it out. It lets you follow the path of your ballot and you can see, hey, it's been received, it's been run through the machine, and so on, so you know that they've got your ballot. So while they can't and wouldn't, even if they could, tell you how many votes there are for one guy versus another guy, they will tell you, they do tell us, by party, what has been turned in so far. So of that 641,000, 43%, or about 277,000 that have been returned, have been Democratic votes. 140,000, or about 22%, have been Republican votes. So Democrats have turned in about twice as many ballots as Republicans have. And then unaffiliated, about 217,000, which is about 34%. And I would say that in Colorado right now, I would say unaffiliated voters lean toward Democrats. So in the early vote, I suspect that there is a fairly large advantage for the Democrats, but I also suspect and we've talked about this before, that the early vote in many places will be more Democratic. Doesn't seem to be happening that way everywhere. For example, Florida seems to have more Republican early votes than some people expected. But I do think on average, you will see a higher percentage of Democratic votes earlier and a higher percentage of Republican votes later. So these numbers don't say to me that Colorado is lost for the Republicans, but these are some pretty big numbers. And it's not a secret that Colorado is a challenge if you look at what happened in 2018, where we had something of a blue wave here and folks just voted for anybody with a D by their name, giving us, for example, Jenna Griswold. We talked about this a couple days ago, our Colorado Secretary of State with absolutely no relevant experience at all, just a political activist. And Colorado voters were so out of their minds with hatred for Donald Trump that they threw out Wayne Williams, the previous Secretary of State, a Republican who was widely viewed by secretaries of state across the country of both political parties to be one of the very, very best secretaries of state in America, and who was a large part of making Colorado's voting procedures as nonpartisan or bipartisan and fair as they could possibly be. The guy is just great. We also threw out the Arapahoe County clerk and recorder, very experienced, excellent person, and replaced him with a woman whose campaign platform was about LGBT rights and all kinds of things that have nothing to do with being a clerk and recorder, and who at some point had been like a customer service agent in some state government bureaucracy, but had no business getting the job either. But that's Republican mood in 2018, and I don't see any reason for it to have changed. I hope I'm wrong. I particularly hope that by some miracle, Cory Gardner can pull this thing out. I wouldn't bet on that, but if I could vote 100 times for Cory Gardner, I would. Having lived in Chicago a long time, maybe I will. Just kidding. For those of you who are listening, trying to get me in trouble later, I know you're out there. Yeah, that's true. I'm still alive, so probably can only vote, 6 or 8 times. Chicago style, right? If I were dead, it would be much, much easier. So anyway, those are the numbers from here in Colorado. There was a similar thing in Florida that I wanted to mention to you. The first day of, hold on, I think I got the Colorado story again. Let me get Florida going here. Florida's first day of early voting was yesterday. I mentioned that briefly yesterday. At least 350,000 ballots were cast in Florida yesterday, massively just destroying their previous opening day record. So about 2.5 million ballots have been collected by voters in Florida heading into that first day, and 350,000 of them were turned in. Again, it seemed in some early numbers like Republicans had a little more turnout in some of the early voting in Florida than people had expected. I think Florida could be a nail-biter. I think Pennsylvania could be a nail-biter. I think President Trump is probably going to lose Michigan that he won last time and Wisconsin that he won last time. He can win without those states, but he probably has to win Florida and Pennsylvania to be able to win. North Carolina looks like it's running neck and neck right now. Some of these states are going to be really close, and we need to keep an eye on this stuff because separate from whoever wins the election, one of the things that concerns me a lot is violence in the streets of America and just massive chaos in America. And if we end up in a position where there is an election that is perceived to be within the margin of fraud, and it ends up, especially if it ends up flipping, for example, it looks like Trump wins it, and it looks like Trump ekes out a victory in the presidential election, but then more counting goes on, especially counting after Election Day, and somehow those votes turn the state for Biden, and then Biden ends up becoming president. That would be more of a disaster for America, much more of a disaster for America than simply the disaster of Joe Biden becoming president. And I am very concerned about that. And I really do hope that whatever happens in this election happens in a way where any given state is not close enough to give a serious chance of having civil unrest because of it. Speaking of Pennsylvania, by the way, I am so tired of courts making law. And I am so tired of Chief Justice John Roberts acting like a liberal. Now, look, in most cases, when it comes to elections, if something is really close in terms of what decision a court would make, I would like courts to make the decisions that maximize the chances of someone's vote counting. All right? I think election fraud is rare. I think it happens. I think it's rare. If there is something that slightly increases the chance of a fraudulent vote getting through, but at the same time make sure that real votes get counted and otherwise they wouldn't, I'd probably go for that. But it's got to be a question that really is a close call within state law as it stands right now. You can't have courts just changing the system. And in Pennsylvania, the system has long been that if you're mailing your ballot and you're voting absentee, your ballot must be received by Election Day. A court claiming that, well, the post office might be slow and there will be more people voting by mail this year, a court said, we are going to extend that deadline from, I think it's 8 p.m. on election night, August 5th this year, November 5th this year, to Friday, from Tuesday to Friday. That is not in the law in Pennsylvania. And it should not be allowed. And I say this with no partisan axe to grind. Not because I think that one way or another it will help one party or the other. Although if you were to ask me, I would say I think the change helps Democrats. But that's not my point. My point is the law. And we cannot have courts changing the law. It went to the Supreme Court, and because the Supreme Court is 4-4 right now, has eight justices right now, they split 4-4 on this question, with Chief Justice Roberts siding with 3 liberals to come to a 4-4 tie, which means the lower court is upheld, which means that the ballots in Pennsylvania can be counted even if they are received after Election Day. And check this out. To be counted, they either have to be postmarked on or before Election Day, or, and isn't this a doozy? You ready? Or have no postmark at all, in which case they will be presumed to have been mailed on Election Day. Are you kidding me? And John Roberts sided with the liberals to go along with that. We cannot have courts making and changing law. I don't care which side it benefits. Now, I want to take a minute here, and let me just warn producer Shannon, I'm going to be a moment late on this break. Yesterday, I saw a tweet from a guy you know as Bo Snerdley. Not his real name, but that's how people know him, who is Rush Limbaugh's producer, responding to a tweet by a really heinous individual, a guy who was actually a radio host who I've never liked, who goes by the name Michael Savage. That is not Michael Savage's real name. And Michael Savage made a comment about Rush Limbaugh crying on his show about having cancer, and Savage said something like, Limbaugh should just leave with dignity or something like that. And I've never, or almost never in my life, so desperately wanted to punch someone in the face as I did with Michael Savage yesterday. And Bo Snerdley's tweet was exceptionally gentlemanly, saying, I've never felt such abject disappointment as I do in this guy. Much too nice, but Bo Snerdley is a gentleman. And I had not heard Rush's show yesterday, so I took some time and went over to, found a replay of it, podcast of it, and went and listened to some of what Rush Limbaugh had to say at the beginning of his show. And I want to just share one clip from it right now. I've got others to share with you over the course of the show.
All going through challenges. Mine are no better, and mine are no different, and mine are no more special than anybody else's. But it can feel like a roller coaster. From the moment you get the diagnosis, there's a part of you every day, okay, that's it, life's over. You just don't win. But when you get that diagnosis, that's... So during the period of time after the diagnosis, you do what you can to prolong life. You do what you can to prolong a happy life. You measure a happy life against whatever medication it takes. And at some point, do you decide, this medication may be working, but I hate the way I feel every day. This is just, I'm not there yet. But it is part and parcel of this. It's tough to realize that the days where I do not think I'm under a death sentence are over. Now, we all are, is the point. We all know that we're going to die at some point, but when you have a terminal disease diagnosis that has a time frame to it, then that puts a different psychological and even physical awareness to it.
Wow. Remarkable thing to talk about in public. We got more of that later in the show. Coming up next, We're going to be joined by Tony Pham, who is the Acting Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We're going to talk about enforcement actions going on right here in Colorado.
This is Denver's Talk Station with Ross Kaminsky now. Tom Martino at 10, 630 KHO.